Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Piss. Ukraine War News Update, second part now for the 20th of November 2024. A lot going on geopolitically speaking, a lot of rant potential for me. I will try not to rant, I'll try and keep it stable. Stay in control, Pierce, stay in control. Let's start with something that is potentially exceptionally destabilizing. This set of events, the underwater cables in the Baltic Sea being cut, if this happened on purpose, and if it can be found to be China or Russia, then the West needs to react to this. And I say the West because actually I think, the US could take something from that, as in that is an open attack on European infrastructure by, let's say, imagine it is Russia. By Russia, what are we doing trying to appease Russia if this is what they are doing? I think this is a dangerous game to be playing. It just seems really bizarre that Russia would do this. Maybe they thought they could get away with it, or I don't know. But this will only lead to Europe uniting more against Russia, really, as far as I can see it. But anyway, okay, so there have been these cables cut under the sea, and I reported on this yesterday, and a whole other bunch of things that have been happening actually over the last 6 months in terms of drone activity and trespassers and sabotage in a number of countries throughout the whole region. The Chinese vessel Yipeng is the main suspect of the investigation into the cutting of 2 submarine cables between Finland and Germany and Sweden and Lithuania, say Reuters. Chinese vessels suspected of cutting the submarine cables docked in Russia 4 days ago. Well, okay, so the captain of the Chinese ship Yipeng 3 is most likely responsible for damaging the cables, according to the Bild, at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, has been identified as, wait for it, a Russian citizen. The cables could have been severed by an anchor or a bottom trawl. 2 Danish Navy ships followed the Yipeng 3. Now, on the cable cutting, Wall Street Journal says they stopped short of pointing the finger at Moscow, but officials from both countries, that's Finland and Germany, said Russia was a prime suspect without revealing any evidence for this suspicion. Then Shashank Joshi is answering. Well, we go to Jim Sciutto first. So from CNN says damage to 2 undersea cables in the Baltic Sea earlier this week is not believed to be deliberate activity by Russia or any other nation. 2 US officials familiar with the initial assessment tell me, quote, at this time there are no indications of nefarious activity nor intentional damage to seafloor infrastructure, one official said. The disruption to the Sea Line 1, which connects Finland and Germany, and the BCS East-West Interlink undersea cable Lithuania to Sweden, was instead likely caused by an anchor drag from a passing vessel, the officials also said. Ship tracking data analysed by CNN shows at least 1 ship crossing the BCS cable, and 2 cables are roughly 60 to 65 kilometres apart. Okay, so the ship dragging. But then Shashank Joshi rightly says, important, in contrast to Germany, it seems that the US thinks cable cutting wasn't deliberate. Very hard to be sure at this stage. How do you prove that anchor dragging was intentional? And are you going to be dragging an anchor like that? Realistically, I mean, that is the event that's made to look like an accident, but surely is not. I don't know. I would say that's incredibly, probabilistically, insanely unlikely to have happened. 2 cables cut broadly the same kind of time. It's just not going to have happened, I think. So Pistorius here, the defense minister for Germany, said the 2 damaged cables in the Baltic Sea between Finland and Germany and Sweden and Lithuania are not an accident. It was sabotage. Very firmly stated there. So I think the Americans are erring on the side of caution, not wanting to be too escalatory in the rhetoric, but no one else is so I guess, vague. Russia is a prime suspect in cutting of 2 data cables running below the Baltic Sea. As mentioned, the Wall Street Journal said. A preliminary investigation involving Sweden, Finland, Lithuania and Germany suggests the cables were likely cut in Swedish economic waters, where they intersect in a small area, with cuts caused by human interference rather than natural phenomena, sources indicate. There are indications that Russia was behind the incidents, which they said was similar to other operations resulting from Moscow's escalating hybrid warfare against NATO countries in Europe, Western officials said. Meanwhile, the Financial Times reported that, according to marine traffic, the Chinese registered vessel Yipeng 3 was near both the Swedish, Lithuanian and Finnish German cables around the time each was cut. Sweden has launched an investigation into the incidents, focusing on the role the vessel might have played. Quote, "The Swedes are taking a hard look at the Chinese vessel," said one person with insight into the investigation. Now, we hear that the Chinese bulk carrier Yipeng 3 has fully stopped in the Kattegat Bay. Danish patrol ship HDMS Solomon is next to it. Danish boarding parties might be on the Chinese cargo ship, which is suspected to be responsible for cutting 2 undersea cables in the Baltic Sea. The skipper of the Chinese ship is a Russian national, and the route leads from Ust-Luga in Russia to Port Said in Egypt. So now we are hearing that the Danish have stopped this ship. So as reported by others long before me, it looks like the Danes stopped the suspect Yipeng 3 yesterday evening. The ship anchored around 8 o'clock last night, accompanied by the Danish Navy, and remains in a position along with at least 1 Navy ship. It's likely we now have to wait until official comments to know more, in particular from the Danes on the Yipeng 3 and from the Swedes on the survey of the site of the cable cuts, but also from other countries involved. Was this sabotage? It's too early to conclude. However, enough information is publicly available, along with the very similar New Polar Bear incident last year, making investigating this as possible sabotage, as Sweden does, the right course of action. A general observation: using merchant ships dragging an anchor is a low-cost, low-tech, effective and deniable method of sabotaging seafloor infrastructure. There are no easy solutions available to counter such a threat. And this is what's brilliant, if you like, about the Russians here, or the Chinese, or whomsoever, is that this is brilliant, plausible deniability. Although, there's a clear Russian-Chinese connection there to what could only be defended as an accident. If they do connect that ship to it, then it was an accident. Why are you dragging your anchor across particularly that part of the seabed? And Darth Putin takes aim at this idea that, and you do see this quite a lot, Russian hybrid attacks. The term hybrid attacks, although it's technically correct, it does do a lot of getting Russia off the hook, I think. Your leaders call them Russian hybrid attacks because if they call them Russian attacks, they might have to do something about them. Ouch. And I think that's really good from Darth Putin there. But I think something needs to be done about this. This is absolutely terrible. I think this is an attack on European infrastructure. So, attacks on the subsea cables, the far right and far left conveying nuclear threats from Putin. Anyone who thinks we can deter aggression on the cheap, think again, says Paul Mason. Now, I'm going to go to his article that he's written in the New European because it leads into another fascinating letter that's been written by a whole host of people. But before we get there, let's just do another couple of things. So, we have heard that the Russians have changed their nuclear doctrine as a result of ATACMS being used, or the restrictions being lifted on ATACMS into Russian territory. And Tom Nichols says, so just to let you know, he's staff writer at The Atlantic. So a few words about this new Russian nuclear doctrine, but here's a short version. It's not doctrine, it's a ploy. And I think that's a great summary there. So the old Soviet Union had a formal military doctrine, and it mattered. Trust me, wrote my doctoral dissertation and first book on it. It mattered because the regime believed in ideology and in conforming its policies and ideology and communicating that to its institutions. Soviet military doctrine was a means of intra-elite communication and policy guidance. Yes, some of it was just BS, but it was a real thing that was meant to make the various parts of the USSR defense world, strategy, industry, etc., to fly in formation. Soviet military doctrine was meant to set the limits and contours of debate around national defense and to make sure no one wandered off the ideological reservation. It was not a set of ironclad rules, but a way of setting parameters on national security stuff. Putin's Russia isn't an ideological state. It is It has no need of doctrine. It's a mafia state run by thugs. Doctrine is whatever Putin wants to do at any given moment, so don't fall for some new doctrine as if it's a trigger or red line that Putin will have to observe. Putin wants you to believe that if it's a new doctrine, that anything that happens will automatically force him to follow his own rules and then have to do something terrible. It's not a doctrine, it's just a BS nuclear Calvin ball. This doesn't mean Putin isn't dangerous, it just means that he's dangerous because he's vain and emotional and capricious. Putin's doctrines, scare quotes doctrines, are like Tony Soprano having a doctrine for running his family. Don't get wrapped in what amounts to Kremlin messaging op. And I think that is a really nice synopsis there. Now, in France, just randomly, it doesn't quite follow the narrative here, but is on general geopolitical stuff. The New Popular Front, the NFP, and the National Rally, the RN, so two far-right groups, have just joined forces to reject a text in the National Assembly that would have funded support for Ukraine. This is absolutely depressing, and we're seeing this repeated around the world. As I am absolutely amazed that Russia have this much influence around the world. I was just reading something from Dominic Cummings, former Boris Johnson Brexiteer guy, like basically pro-Russia. You read this going on in France. You read everything going on with the Trump administration, and I just get depressed and is supremely angry. And I think, wow, Russia, and I've said this many times before, but their return on investment for influence operations around the world is insane. Absolutely insane. The fact that they've got the White House in their pocket blows my mind. But the fact that they've got so much influence in Hungary and Slovakia, right throughout the EU, is incredibly depressing. But also, hats off to the Russians for doing a magnificent job in upsetting all of these political apple carts around the world. Right, now, going back to this Paul Mason article in the New European, this is a really good article, and then he goes on to set out, he was one of the signatories to this letter that's been published in the Byline Times, and we're going to go on to that, but he gives a bit of personal preamble to them explaining what that letter was about. So Biden's wake-up call to Europe: the Ukraine missile strikes he has permitted won't change the war, but they must change minds in the EU and UK. So the foundation to this article is the lifting of restrictions of ATACMS. He says, he goes on a bit later to say, Putin is in this war to win, and he needs to win fast because the Russian war economy is reaching the limits of its capacity to reproduce and will, say Western experts, hit a wall sometime next year. I agree with this, and we'll look at a little bit of this in a minute. So Biden's move and the likely strikes using ATACMS missiles into the Russian rear is both welcome and too late. While we in the West go about our everyday lives, Putin is waging a relentless war of aggression against the Ukrainian people and through them the international system that keeps us safe. We could have said back in 2022 that Ukraine is beyond our sphere of interest and the atrocities committed by Russian troops beyond our capacity to care, but we did not. Key Western institutions, the European Union, NATO, and a solid bloc of democratic countries at the United Nations pledged money, arms, intelligence, and training for Ukraine, and repeatedly said they would stand with Kyiv for as long as it takes. The mistake we made then was to believe wars like this can be managed and don't need to be won, or rather this was a mistake driven by Biden and acquiesced to by European leaders obliged to defer to America because they lack the sheer physical and moral capacity to defend themselves. So even if we now see a few spectacular strikes on Russian air bases and troop concentrations, Ukraine will remain on the defensive for at least another year, even if the incoming Trump administration does not pull the plug on their resistance altogether. Strategically, Ukraine is in danger of losing this war, and we in Europe should be in no doubt what that might mean. At a human level, we could see 10 million refugees across the continent, among them thousands of angry and psychologically distressed former combatants. At an economic level, it would give Putin control of 27% of the world's grain harvest and increased diplomatic leverage over the countries dependent on it. At a geostrategic level, it could mean simply this: that aggression pays. A country of 40 million people will see its language and culture crushed by Russian ethno-nationalism, and the aggression will not stop. One of the hardest learnt lessons by students of fascism in the 20th century was take fascists at their word. When Putin issues draft treaties proposing to demilitarize Eastern Europe and return Poland, the Baltics and Romania to the status of buffer states, that is what he means to achieve. And he said that, and his propagandists have said this on TV. Be under no illusion that really that's what they want. Whether they have the capabilities to do that, it's perhaps another question. But they would love Eastern Europe to acquiesce to Russia and to become part of either a buffer status or to become part of a new Soviet empire. It would dismember the EU and represent strategic defeat for NATO. Western Europe's security would then rely entirely on America, which, as we have seen, is no longer a reliable democracy. There is a solution, but it involves the entire Western electorate heeding the wake-up call. It is not clear yet how nakedly the Trump administration intends to portray Ukraine. The nomination of Marco Rubio, an ally of Ukraine, to the State Department may indicate Trump is prepared to play hardball with Putin to achieve some kind of deal that forces Ukraine to give territory away. But in all eventualities, Ukraine is going to need an alliance of willing countries to help defend itself. And for at least the next 4 years, that same coalition of the willing will need to stand together in the defense of Europe itself, because what Trump is ready to do to Ukraine, he is also ready to do to us. It's a really important point that Trump doesn't like the EU. Trump likes the UK out of Europe and not working with Europe. He sees us as weak and Europe as weak if it's pulled apart, and has very similar kind of opinions to the EU as Vladimir Putin does, interestingly. He's long not been a fan of alliances, NATO and the EU particularly. So there is nothing that Trump is going to do that's going to benefit Europe at the moment, and that's going to really benefit Ukraine. We've got to cast the US off here. After January the 20th, it's like, do one, because the writing is on the wall for your beliefs. Now, in this context, Benjamin Tallaty says, really pleased to have experts like Umland here, Andreas Umland, lend their weight to our call for a coalition of the willing to secure Ukraine. Read our 5-point plan. So this is what then Paul Mason goes on to discuss, which is the 5-point plan. But we're going to look into that here in the Byline Times. And this is a letter, a joint letter written by, or at least signed by, an awful lot of big people here. So former Defence Secretary of State for Defence for the UK, Ben Wallace. You got Kaya Ollongren, former MOD, former Minister of Defence in the Netherlands. You got loads of people. Ben Hodges, Edward Stringer, retired Air Marshal in UK. Mick Ryan, Margaret Atwood, interesting. Professor Elliot Cohen, Gary Kasparov, Phillips O'Brien, Alexander Vindman. Loads and loads of people in this one. Just read a few more. Adam Kinzinger, Edward Lucas, Benjamin Tallis, Paul Mason, I just read from him, Edward Hunter Christie, and then a few more. Gustav Gressel, I wanted to interview him at one point. Who else? Lots of people. Michael Weiss, Ed Arnold, and Jan Willem Rupert. A few others, Ian Garner, who's also good. So, etc., etc. You get the point. Like, lots of people have signed this. Now, on the one hand, letters, like strongly worded letter, whatever. But actually, there's some good thinking in here. Europe and Canada must forget Trump and form a coalition of the willing to defend Ukraine. Senior politicians, military leaders, and experts send an open letter calling on Europe and Canada to join forces in defending Ukraine from Russian aggression. They set out 5 points here. Here we propose 5 things that the European-Canadian coalition of the willing should and can do. 1. Arm Ukraine to win. Coalition can get Ukraine what it needs to win from their own stocks, procurement on the open market, as well as the most cost effectively by technology transfer to and investment in Ukraine's own defence industry. The coalition's focus should be on war-winning capabilities, including long-range precision strikes with no restrictions on targeting, electronic warfare, command and control, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, as well as the emerging defence technologies that offset traditional Russian advantages and core basics like artillery, 155mm ammunition, anti-war air, anti-ship, and anti-tank systems and munitions. 2. Seize all the frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's victory. Confiscating frozen Russian assets is economically feasible, legal, and the international principle of countermeasures. Under the international principle of countermeasures, and would establish a financial deterrent to future aggression. And many of these points are being underwritten by other arguments that you can see in the hyperlinked documents or sources behind them. The $300 billion of frozen assets is 4 times US military aid to Ukraine since 2022, and roughly 75% of total Western assistance to date. Seizing the full amount would be the best way to get Ukraine the money it needs to defend itself and seriously degrade Russian morale. Canada has ready legislation, and most of the frozen Russian assets are in Europe. The coalition states should seize those in their jurisdiction without delay to set a clear precedent, and other NATO allies can follow. 3. Extend air defence over Western Ukraine and use it to cover coalition troops on the ground. Air defence assets based in coalition countries or sent to states bordering Ukraine can provide a shield over Western Ukraine and take some of the pressure off Ukrainian air defence assets. Russian missiles and drones are flying toward our borders and we can't take chances. Coalition states could then use this shield to put their own troops on the ground, as proposed by French President Emmanuel Macron, to help train Ukrainian forces, provide logistical and demining support, and conduct other tasks that would demonstrate our commitment to Ukraine's victory and security. 4. Provide real security guarantees, including mutual defence, to shepherd Ukraine into NATO. Now remember, these are what sensible people like you and I think should happen. But remember, the US incoming administration has explicitly said, a number of them have said that Ukraine should not be allowed to join NATO. This is what JD Vance, the vice president, has said. This is what others have said. So, yeah, it gives you a sense of where the incoming administration really is. Anyway. Much as Sweden and Finland needed guarantees from strong partners while they waited for their NATO membership to be concluded, so too does Ukraine. The coalition can commit now to mutual defence with Ukraine in the intervening period after the end of the current hostilities. It can use that time to help drive interoperability and coordination, accelerating Ukraine's path into the alliance, which it would strengthen. An unambiguous coalition commitment backed up by growing capabilities would deter future Russian attacks on Ukraine and ourselves. And 5, show we can stand up for ourselves. The coalition can commit to each spend at least 3% of GDP on defence annually and to joint procurement of the critical enablers that Europe and Canada lack, including through common borrowing. But the war and our credibility must be won on other fronts too. Europeans and Canadians' economic advantage over Russia must be leveraged and strategically targeted to be meaningful. The coalition should move to tighten and enforce sanctions, but also work to defeat Russia economically, turning the screws to cripple its creaking war machine. China must be shown that its support for Russia's war is unacceptable and it cannot buy us off. So whatever the final composition of the Trump administration, whatever policies or predilections it pursues, a coalition of willing states can set the Euro-Atlantic area on a more secure path. By taking the steps outlined here, Europeans and Canadians could show how we can pull our weight in NATO while simultaneously ensuring against any decrease in the US capability commitment in Europe. We can show how to be good allies as the US pivots to keep China in check and demonstrate that deterring China in Taiwan begins with deterring Russia across Europe and defeating it in Ukraine. Time is of the essence, and so we, the signatories of this letter, urge European states and Canada to embrace their power quickly, form a coalition of the willing, and together take these steps for Ukraine's security and our own. And of course, it depends what goes on in Canada politically, to be quite honest. Right, good stuff. Now, you have heard me say a number of times my biggest concern when the new administration comes in the US, that they will lift sanctions. And if they lift sanctions, Ukraine's screwed, and actually it undoes any European unity you might have heard in the last expose, right? This would be terrible, terrible news. And what do we now hear? TASS is reporting, albeit a Russian news source, Trump may lift sanctions against Russia upon the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Julia Davis says, meanwhile in Russia, an unnamed member of Trump's transition team reportedly told Russian state media that Trump might lift sanctions against Russia and normalize trade and economic relations. I'm assuming this would be in addition to Ukraine's territorial concessions. What a bargain. Now, is this true? Don't know. This is TASS, but this is my worry. This is what I predict. I predict this will happen. And if it does, I'll be insanely angry because the US is siding overtly with Russia. Siding with Russia. Meanwhile, One of Russia's largest refineries is partially shut down due to an accident. And meanwhile, Russian inflation is out of control. With a median salary of 34,200 rubles a month, Russians now have an average weekly grocery spend of 8,889 rubles, which is up 28% this year. Let's hope the US is wise enough not to bail them out again. And this is the worry. It's like Russia are in trouble. And in 2 months' time, Trump comes along and says, I'm going to lift those sanctions. Honestly, I'm close to getting really, really angry. I hope it doesn't happen. Maybe it won't happen, but I just feel that that's what Trump is going to do. Putin is apparently open to discussing Ukrainian ceasefire with Trump, according to Reuters. Now, as I've said before, this will only be if it's to the benefit of Russia. Like, he will only agree to ceasefires if Ukraine gets screwed over. But the thing is, Trump doesn't care about that. He doesn't care who gets screwed over. He just wants peace, right? I want to stop all the dying. He wants to be seen as like the peace broker. But actually, he will be, if that happens, the enforcer of Russia's reward, really. Now, it's not just Trump, it's all the people around Trump that say these same sort of things. And the rhetoric is terrible at the moment. It's terrible. You've got David Sachs, this tech bro, who's been saying, Biden giving them ATACMS is going to start World War III. Just on a point of that, David Sachs has warned of an imminent World War III nearly every single month for the past 2 years. Here's just a selection of what he has said over time. The White House is ready to greenlight the use of American missiles to strike targets deep inside of Russia. The Russians have many ways to retaliate. Why are we taking this risk? Ukraine is neither a treaty ally nor a vital interest. I'd say that's wrong. Both, the Budapest Memorandum and they are a vital interest. Biden himself once warned this could cause World War III. And then he said previously, if the Uni Party really cared about national security threats, they would seal the border and stop tempting World War III with the Russian blah, 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 blah. If you want World War III, this is going to be World War III. Kamala Harris, World War III. Biden, World War III. TDS created Russiagate and liberals brought it. World War III. Shut up. Just honestly, shut up. Ilya Ponomarenko reacting to Elon Musk, who said the problem is that Russia will respond reciprocally. So he's like warning about the use of ATACMS. So here, all of us going, thank goodness, why is it taking 2.5 years? And you got Elon Musk and David Sachs saying, well, it's a problem. It's going to be escalation. World War III. Russia will respond reciprocally. Ilya Ponomarenko says, because for 3 years before now, Russia has been throwing flowers at us and treated us with jam and cookies against a backdrop of joyful rainbows and unicorns. Now they will start doing bad things to us. They've been responding reciprocally. In fact, it's Ukraine that is the one trying to respond reciprocally, you prime donut. Elon Musk, honestly, I want to punch you in the face. It's this blame game that's like, what you've done is escalatory and now Russia are going to respond to that. No, we are responding by hitting Russia in the way that Russia is hitting us, you idiots. This is us being reciprocal. Screw them. If they respond, it will be escalatory due to them being aggressive wingnuts. We have every right to be doing what we are doing. And in fact, we need to be able to do it even more. And by the way, they won't respond escalatorily, if that's a word, because actually we've been responding reciprocally each point that we possibly can when we're allowed to and being given the weapons to do so. And Russia's not changed its behavior at all. So Elon Musk, you don't know what you're talking about. You're siding with Russia again. And then you got Charlie Kirk. Dear Russian people, says Charlie Kirk, one of the main people behind the campaigns, actually is Turning Point USA, which is a Charlie Kirk thing that kind of ran the campaign. Very few, for the Republicans, very few Americans want war with you. Most of us are glad the Cold War ended and want a friendly relationship. The people obsessed with the fighting you forever are a minority and they're on their way out of power. We want peace. Ignore our current leaders. Charlie Sykes says, MAGA already kissing Putin's backside. These are Putin bootlickers. And these are the people around Trump. Now, Ryan Macbeth here has it right. So we're going to listen to him. I want to interview Ryan, actually. I know a lot of you probably watch his channel. He's good.
Here's how you end up in a war with China in one easy tweet. Political commentator Charlie Kirk put out a letter to Russia saying he only wants peace. I'm at a NATO conference in Brussels right now, and one of the things I've learned is that if we do not support Ukraine, we will be fighting China in 2 or 3 years. China intends to invade Taiwan in October 2027 or April of 2028. China is actively destroying American manufacturing jobs. They are putting deadly chemicals on our street, and they think we are weak. If we don't support Ukraine, they will think we are even weaker, and they will take that as a green light that they could invade Taiwan in 2027 or 2028, and we won't do anything about it. The fact is that arming Ukraine now with weapons, not even soldiers, just weapons, puts America first, because ultimately it will deter China, and that will save American lives.
Boom! Drop that mic. Absolutely on point. And these complete dingbats who are just Russian simps. It goes back to, yeah, we can talk about David Sachs. Yeah, we can talk about Elon Musk. Yeah, we can talk about Charlie Kirk. And yeah, we can talk about Donald Trump Jr. But we can also talk about Donald Trump. And America is going down the wrong course at the moment. They are taking the wrong route with the incoming administration. Let's have a look at a couple of their picks and then discuss them in light of Ukraine and Russia. So how Russian of him, the internet mocks Trump for picking another propagandist for the cabinet. So we've got another crazy selection. Who is it this time? Representative Sean Duffy, who is a host on Fox News, is going to be, and he's going to be Secretary of Transportation. I think he was he on MTV as well? Real life. Anyway, he's going to be Secretary of Transportation. George Takei saying he's putting a propagandist in charge of policy, wrote former Star Trek actor George Takei. How Russian of him. You've got these bizarre choices. So I just want to remind you of the Director of National Intelligence nominee, Tulsi Gabbard. This is what Tulsi Gabbard said in 2019.
He's essentially pimping out our men and women in uniform to a foreign power who's the highest bidder, and saying very blatantly and very directly, well, hey, look, they're paying us for them. He is unfit to be our commander-in-chief.
She's talking about Trump, by the way, and now she is being nominated by him for DNI.
And what he is doing is dishonoring the service and the sacrifice that every single one of these service members is doing for our country, and the service and sacrifice that their loved ones and their family members go through.
I take it she was just lying then. So why did Trump choose Tulsi Gabbard? The answer seems obvious. Her willingness to parrot Trump's talking points and support his agenda makes her an ideal flunky. She would twist intelligence to fit Trump's political narrative. This is an article in the Bulwark by Adam Kinzinger. He said, during my time in Progress, I had the privilege of working with all kinds of people from all over the country with different experiences, backgrounds, priorities, ideologies, approaches, strengths and weaknesses. One of the people I overlapped with was Tulsi Gabbard, whom Donald Trump has announced he intended to nominate to become Director of National Intelligence. This role, the top job in America's huge, powerful, world-beating intelligence gathering and analysis enterprise, requires someone with steadfast integrity, sound judgment, and an unwavering commitment to the security of the United States. Gabbard lacks all three qualities. This isn't personal. I didn't work particularly closely with Gabbard, who was a junior Democrat when I was a junior Republican. We didn't cross paths enough to develop an personal enmity. This is about qualifications and character. The DNI is entrusted with coordinating the vast intelligence apparatus of the United States, overseeing 18 agencies, including the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI. Tasked with protecting our country from threats, foreign and domestic, this role requires someone who embodies stability, impartiality, and a commitment to truth. Based on Gabbard's record and demeanor, she fails on all accounts. What I saw in Gabbard when we were in the House was a politician who seemed more concerned with self-promotion than serious governance. While some members of Congress are known for their principled stands, she was known for her erratic behaviour and frequent flip-flopping. She switched positions on key issues whenever it suited her political ambitions, leaving her colleagues and the public questioning where her true convictions lay. For example, in 2016, she sponsored legislation to sanction Iran for its ballistic missile program, but in 2021, she called sanctions draconian and equated them to starvation tactics. What changed in between? Hard to say, but it might have been tough sanctions against Russia that Congress passed in 2017. some members of Congress are staunch ideologues, others are flexible pragmatists. Congress is a lot like America in that way. One skill that successful legislators learn is how to work with ideologues who have fixed commitments to their principles and when to let them take their stands. I've taken my fair share, but Gabbard didn't fall into either of those camps. Instead, she attached herself to whatever movement she thought was most likely to lead to her personal promotion. This is rather like J.D. Vance. Just say what you like. Go completely against what you said previously because you have this insatiable desire for power. When that was the Bernie Sanders progressive wing of the Democratic Party, she became a Sanders-style progressive. When she saw more of an opportunity in Trump's MAGA movement, she turned on a dime to join it and even switched parties. There are only three constants in Gabbard's political biography: self-promotion and attraction to quasi-revolutionary movements like Sanders's and Trump's, coupled with the hostility to the boring detailed work of governing, and an abiding attraction to murderous authoritarians. She has been a frequent guest on Russian state-sponsored television, often parroting narratives that align more closely with Putin's propaganda than with American interests, or for that matter, truth. Her controversial meeting with Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad in 2017 raised serious questions about her judgment and motivations. Assad, a brutal autocrat responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of his own citizens, is not someone any American leader should cozy up to, yet Tulsi saw it fit to grant him legitimacy by meeting with him, an act widely condemned by members of both parties and one that would prevent any normal American from obtaining even the lowest level security clearance. So that was an interesting thing because no one knows who paid for that, no one knows what went on there. It was just a really weird thing. And I think it shows that she is pretty compromised personally. Gabbard often touts her military service, and while I respect her for wearing the uniform, military service alone does not qualify someone to lead our intelligence community. Moreover, her time in Congress showed little evidence that she understands the complexities of the intelligence world. She did not serve on committees with significant oversight of intelligence operations, nor did she display a grasp of the nuances required to manage and interpret intelligence effectively. She's never shown the people skills required for a position that oversees 18 other chief executives, all of whom also have other bosses. And she's never run an organization anywhere close to as big and as complicated as the intelligence community. What concerns me most, however, is the amorality apparent in her decision-making. A DNI must be resolute in defending the Constitution, impartial in assessing threats, and unwavering in his or her commitment to American values. Gabbard's track record suggests that she prioritizes personal advancement and political expediency over these critical responsibilities. Her ability to shift loyalties and principles to suit her ambitions is not a trait we need in a position that demands impartiality and integrity. Trump's choice of Gabbard for the role is as perplexing as it is dangerous. By selecting someone with no significant intelligence experience and a history of erratic behavior, he is undermining the credibility of one of the most important positions in our national security apparatus, one whose ability not only to uncover and protect secrets, but to tell hard truths to people in power is a key asymmetric advantage the United States enjoys over its adversaries. Worse still, Gabbard's history of promoting authoritarian narratives raises legitimate concerns about her ability to prioritize American interests over those of foreign adversaries. Why did Trump choose Gabbard? The answer seems obvious. Her willingness to parrot Trump's talking points and support his agenda makes her an ideal flunky. As DNI, she would be expected to provide impartial analysis and offer hard truths when necessary, even if it conflicts with the president's desires. But based on her history, I have little confidence she would do so. Instead, she would twist intelligence to fit Trump's political narrative, jeopardizing the safety and security of the American people. It's important to keep in mind that the risks to American national security aren't abstract. Sometimes America's intelligence advantage comes from human sources and our ability to recruit people to betray their own governments on behalf of the United States. These human sources help us to stay one step ahead of our adversaries. In the past, when their security has been compromised, they have been executed. I worry that what might happen to untold members of American assets if someone as reckless, inexperienced, and outright disloyal as Gabbard were DNI. The Senate still has the opportunity to block Gabbard's nomination. Some current senators served with Gabbard, but for those who didn't, take it from me, we're all much safer if you vote no. We're going to return to this idea of SIGINT and HUMINT, like intelligence services, in light of these choices. I'm just going to give you another couple of pick picks here. So Donald Trump has picked World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, co-founder and transition co-chair Linda McMahon as his nominee for Education Secretary. Trump has criticised the Department of Education, which he has promised to close down. This is Linda McMahon, just to give you some context. So that's Linda McMahon. That's a new Education Secretary. And there you go. Okay, so could be a good choice. Who knows? These are the picks in general at the moment. Anything surprising to you? The one thing that's surprising to me is there's no black person there at all. It's just a sea of white, although you can say Stephen Chung, but goodness me, he's thoroughly problematic. And Vivek Ramaswamy, Tulsi Gabbard as well to a degree. But these are like real obsequious MAGA types. But a lot of people are complaining there's not a lot of diversity in there. But, you know, since they're against DEI, that's hardly surprising. Then we go on to Matt Gaetz again. So records are now coming out. There's lots of, not quite leaks, but things that are coming out into the information space that he sent $10,000 via Venmo to two women who testified in misconduct probes. Some witnesses allege the payments were for sex. Gaetz denies wrongdoing and resigned ahead of the House ethics report. This ethics report, I hope, will come out because this guy should not be the Attorney General, but he's someone else that's going to use the FBI, etc., to do the bidding of Trump, and it will not the guardrails will be taken away. There will be no checks and balances, and it's very, very worrying. Okay, so all of that is leading towards these kind of points. So Shashank Joshi from The Economist, referring to the Washington Post, Trump ignores transition rules. It's a hostile takeover, an ally says. So absolute bonanza for foreign SIGINTs, so signals intelligence agencies, which is like listening into phone calls, intercepts and all that kind of stuff. So an absolute bonanza for foreign SIGINT agencies. Quote, in calls with foreign heads of state, Trump has cut out the State Department, its secure lines and its official interpreters. Trump and his team are phoning people all around the world. Elon Musk has been on a phone call with Iran, with Zelensky, with Erdogan. And there's no security going on. It's just like random phone calls that can be intercepted. It's just terrible. Absolute bonanza for foreign humans, so human intelligence agencies. Quote, Trump's transition team is considering moving on its first day in office to give those appointees blanket security clearances, according to people familiar with the discussions. The transition team cannot use secure federal email servers to communicate, a particular concern, security experts said, after the Trump campaign was hacked by Iran. Thus far, Trump has left the job of vetting candidates to Stanley Woodward, a Palm Beach lawyer on his campaign who has represented several January the 6th rioters and Trump associates caught up in the classified documents case, according to transition staff. Members of Congress in both parties question whether Tulsi Gabbard and Gaetz, who was recently the subject of a federal sex trafficking investigation and is Trump's choice for Attorney General, could survive FBI background checks. And he's trying now to get around not having them have background checks by the FBI. This is all bad for US intelligence, which is looking like it's going to be sidelined possibly by EU and UK intelligence. Gary Kasparov says in response, the privatization of state power will accelerate. Office holders will mostly be fronts and distractions, while the real action is largely unseen between domestic and foreign oligarchs and family members. Been there, done that in Russia. This is exactly the playbook of dictatorships where family members are doing like X, Y, and Z. You've got oligarchs involved, moneyed interests. You've got there's going to be, if this continues, it's just going to be untold amounts of corruption. And the US will suffer. The US will suffer the next 4 years. I'm fairly sure of that. Not just economically, but I think in terms of intelligence, in terms of soft power around the world, in terms of people's opinion of what America is. I can tell you that because I've just been down a pub and even my right-wing mate was like, yeah, I wouldn't have voted for Trump because nut job. And like, so my mate who is against like woke and all that stuff recognizes that the incoming Trump administration is not good for the world. For all the reasons I've kind of been setting out, like my mate's, pretty sound, got a great grasp of what's going on. Edward Hunter Christie says, expectations about how Trump might approach the Russia-Ukraine war are low to very low. But the other side of the coin is, one thing is for certain, everybody who followed the war closely has a negative opinion about the legacy of the Biden-Sullivan administration. We will never forget the repeated slow walking of pivotal assistance to a country fighting for its very survival, nor the dishonest narratives that came out of the White House and also on some occasions out of the Pentagon, for example, regarding strikes on refineries. It has been maddening to see what is still the world's #1 military power, the linchpin of the free world, become so easily cowed and frightened in the midst of a violently deteriorating world order. The great powers have had the means to annihilate one another for over 60 years. Nuclear brinkmanship wasn't new and Mr. Biden wasn't inexperienced. But when push came to shove, fear triumphed over courage and the aggressor states grew bolder. Now, I'm worried that you're going to go from a weak support of Ukraine to an outright opposition to Ukraine and a support for Russia in an autocracy wannabe. I just hope there's a slim enough majority only for the Russians, for the GOP in the House of Representatives, that the Democrats can put some checks and balances in place, and that the Senate majority is also not like massive, and there are enough people in the Senate who are sensible for the Republicans, because it's not looking good at the moment. Maybe 2 years' time, if he goes too nuts, then actually you could get a bit of a whiplash going on in 2026, but I don't know. Am I overreacting? I don't think so, because actually it looks like I'm not overreacting, because do you know what? All these very, very much more knowledgeable people than me signing this letter are very, very worried. Worried to the point that they have put a plan in place for the EU, UK and Canada to come together in the absence of Trumpian support for Ukraine. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Hopefully that was of use and of interest, and I'll speak to you soon.